First thing I want to do is take off the wheel. If you have steel wheels with the hubcaps, you can use a little pry bar or screwdriver to gently pry the hubcap off. Just be gentle so you don't crack it or break it. Sometimes they get a little stuck. And with a 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then take the wheel off. Take off this bolt and then these 2 nuts. The factory size is a 17mm for all 3. Mine's an 18 and 2 19s. With a pry bar, you can pry the control arm down. That'll separate it from the ball joint. You can spin this ball joint around whichever way, just so you can get it out of your way and it doesn't reinsert itself in there. In order to take this control arm out, the motor mount on this side has to come off because one of the bolts is not really accessible. And to do that, take the 2 caps off here. That'll expose 2 of the bolts, or nuts I should say, for the engine mount. With a 17mm socket, remove all 3 of these nuts. With a pole jack, I'm going to have to lift up the engine and transmission in order to clear these studs out of the subframe. So go ahead and jack up. I'm going to jack up right here on the transmission casing. Definitely do not jack up on the oil pan or the transmission pan or the exhaust or anything like that. Now just lift it up gently until these studs come out of their holes. Before I move any further, I'm going to loosen up the nut up top here with a 19mm. You don't have to take it all the way off, but loosen it so that once you jack up the engine and transmission, you can just easily take this nut right off. So you just want to keep going up until the studs, either on the top or on the bottom, are clear to come out. Perfect. Now at this point, theoretically, in the procedure, the official procedure, it says to remove the engine and transmission. Obviously, we're not going to do that, so what I'm going to try to do is take a wrench this out of here with the motor mount lifted this much out of the way. I'm pretty sure I'll have room to get this bolt out. It will be pretty tight though, so you can either put a pipe on your wrench or break it free a different way. All right, that broke free. I'm just going to go ahead and wrench it all the way out. It's going to take a while, but it's definitely worth doing it this way. Okay, I got this loose to where I can take it off by hand, unthread it all the way. If you just hold this motor mount out of your way, the bolt can come out completely. This bolt on the back side I can get to with my socket and a little swivel. So put that on and remove the bolt. It's a 22mm also. With a 19mm wrench, I'm going to hold the nut side on the top here, and 19 socket, going to remove the bolt. I'm going to slightly spin it. Sometimes you can use a wrench and spin it at the same time and guide it out. Perfect. Next, with a long pry bar, I'm going to try to pry this rear bushing out first. Perfect. Now you can pull this out of the rear bushing, kind of twist it a little bit, move the motor mount to the side, pry on it, whatever you have to do. And as you twist this control arm and bolt, they come out together. And let me see, this piece fell. And this piece actually fell. That sat right here, and it just acted as a spacer between the subframe and this mounting point here. So don't lose that because otherwise it'll sit at a weird angle. But basically take this off, take this out, and here's your old control arm. Install your new control arm. I'm going to attempt to line it up with the rear bushing first. And once it's in, I'm not going to put the bolt in or anything. I want it still loose. I'm going to slide it in on the front here. And before I put any bolts in, there's this little spacer that went on the rear part of this front bushing. I'm just going to gently pry it up and slide this in. The reason I didn't put it on beforehand is because it would just be in my way. I'm going to attempt to get this front bolt in. I will pry the motor mount slightly out of the way. I'm going to try and keep hammering in the rest of the way with my pry bar and hammer. Got it. Now it's in the hole and it has reached the threads. From this point on it needs to be threaded. But well, that's basically the easiest, and if not the only way to get it in, just because this new bushing is at such steep of an angle, just because it's new and not worn, that putting it in the way that it came out is almost impossible. So that's why I chose to do it this way and just pry the motor mount out of the way. At this point, if you take a pry bar and just lift up on this bushing a little bit, you can slide on the spacer up front here. I've already put it on because it was basically just ready to go on earlier, so it slid on for me. Basically, now it's ready for this bolt and then the rear bolt. I'm gonna line up this rear bushing first before I put in the other bolt up front, just so I have this area secured. I'm using a pry bar just to line up the hole. Go ahead and line up the rear bushing now. You can hammer the bolt in. And now I'll have to line up the top. It's easier to line up the bottom because you can just pry it around, but the top basically needs to twist in that way. Sometimes you can use a socket and an extension as leverage to pry on whatever you have to pry on and drive it up through. So now it's basically just threading itself on because there's pressure holding it. That's secured. I'll drive it up through and put the nut on. I'm going to finish driving this through. Perfect. Install your nut. I'm not going to tighten it yet, but I just want it on there so it's secure. And now let's put in the other front bolt. Go ahead and start in your front bolt. I'm going to go ahead and pry. Basically, the control arm needs to slide down towards me just a little bit. I think I fell into the hole, so I'm going to try and hammer it in the rest of the way. Perfect. Now that the threads are started, I'm going to drive it down most of the way. I don't want to tighten it completely because I still need to start the front one and I want the control arm to be able to still move a little bit. I'm going to use a ratcheting wrench to tighten this bolt. Otherwise, with a regular wrench, I'll be here for half an hour trying to thread it on. Bottom it out, and I'm just going to straight up tighten it. There's no way I can get a torque wrench in here, so I'm just going to use my wrench and make it as tight as I possibly can. The torque for these bolts is 148 foot-pounds, just these two fronts. The rear is 152. So like I said, I'm just going to make it as tight as I possibly can with a wrench, and then I'll just torque the other two. Okay, that's snug. I'm going to go ahead and tighten it as tight as I can by hand. It's pretty tight. If you want to put a pipe on this wrench and keep going, you can certainly do that. Bottom this one out too, and then we'll torque it to 148. All right, 148 foot-pounds. Go ahead and tighten this rear one up, and then we'll torque it to 152.
There we go.
Go ahead and drop the engine down now. Make sure the engine mount studs line up with their holes and they go in. If not, just, you know, push it wherever it needs to go. All right, let this down all the way. And remove your supporting apparatus. I'm going to put these three nuts back on. And after I tighten them up, I'll torque them to 64 foot-pounds. Just want to start them by hand, that way the threads don't cross-thread. Like I said, 64 foot-pounds. And now don't forget about these two little plastic caps. Those just protect the threads in there from debris and water. With a pry bar, I'm going to stick it into this hole here and pry this control arm down. Line up the ball joint bolts. There we go. And start on your nuts, as well as this bolt. Snug them up. 55 foot-pounds for these two nuts and the bolt. Gonna put the tie rod in back in, line it up with the hole, press it down, install your castle nut, bottom it out, and then torque it to 36 foot-pounds. All right, that's torque right there. Make sure you line up your hole for the cotter pin with the slot in the castle nut. If it doesn't line up, you have to keep tightening, don't loosen. Go ahead and put the axle nut back on. I'm gonna use my air gun to put it on, but I'm not gonna tighten it. I'm just gonna get it close with it so it doesn't take forever. Okay, from here on I'm gonna torque it with my torque wrench to 217 foot-pounds. So you can put this pry bar on the ground. I just have it resting on my lift, and the reason we're going to do this is because otherwise the rotor is just going to spin, or the whole hub. Torque this to 217 foot-pounds. Go ahead and punch the axle nut back in right here to lock it. Go ahead and put the wheel back on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 76 foot-pounds. Now don't forget your hubcap. When you put this on, make sure that this slot here, this cutout, matches with the valve stem. Otherwise, if you put it over here, it'll just smash the valve stems to the side. So match that up. Oops. Match that up, make sure it goes through, and hit it on there. Perfect. Now take it for a road test.